argument a lot, like with the collateral damage that we're seeing in Gaza. Don't you create more terrorists, more resentment to the West, more resentment to Israel? But then if you look at examples of Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan, that wasn't the case. Now, I don't know in what sense that's transferable between those societies of those in the 40s and 50s to what we're dealing with now. Do you see it as the same in that populations will eventually turn on their regimes that oppress them by seeing the wrath of and the ruthlessness of the armies that defend themselves?
I do. I don't see any reason why it doesn't apply. That is, you need to bring them to their knees. You need to bring them to the conclusion. And I know bring them to their knees is tough, but you need to bring them to the conclusion that their embracing of violence is self-defeating. Their embracing of violence will only bring violence upon them, and with their suffering to themselves and to their children, their families, and to everything that they value. And at the end of the day, the only way they can escape this violence is by, reconstituting the ideology that drives their society. It requires a cultural change. The only way is through some kind of shock therapy. It doesn't happen without it. It's very, very rare that you see peace negotiated that lasts. Almost all peace that lasts is a result of victory, not of negotiation. There are lots of negotiations for peace all over the world. And how long does it last? Nothing happens.
Israel's won many wars and still finds itself with its hands tied.
Because it's never defeated the enemy completely, right? Yeah. It never has. It's by the way, it's always been stopped. And there's no question that Israel defeating the Egyptians as thoroughly as they did and coming so close to really wiping them out in 1973 led Sadat, he had his best shot. That was his best shot ever to beat Israel. And it still won. And that's what brought him to the negotiating table. That's what established peace between Israel and Egypt. If Israel had never crossed the Suez Canal, I don't know how many of your listeners know about the Yom Kippur War, but
with Helen Mirren and everything, she kind of brought it to light a little bit. So they probably know now.
That's right, the movie. But if the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal, they were on the Israeli side of the Sinai. They had a clear path north. If there had been some kind of ceasefire and end where the Israelis were backed up and the Egyptians were on that side of the Sinai, and Israel never crosses the Suez Canal, there would not be peace. Sadat would have said, I won this time. I'll try again next time. Maybe I'll win a little bit more territory. The fact that Israel beat them back and almost destroyed the entire Third Army, really it completely destroyed them, is what led to peace.
So, the thing that stands out to me is the word army. As you said, they almost destroyed the army. I can see the comment sections coming in on these episodes, and I'm sure you're no stranger to it, these accusations, the slander of Israel being this genocidal regime that is intentionally targeting Palestinians simply because of their ethnicity. And these stuff, obviously,
that's crazy.
You don't have to convince me that they're false charges, but the idea is when you say words like wipe them out or destroy them completely, I guess I'm curious what the limits of retaliation are in terms of strategic advantage once you have clear victory. Past that point, if you continue, are we now subjecting Israel to sort of a moral judgment of, if civilians die as a result that aren't strategically advantageous or collateral damage to you fighting an enemy, now you've crossed a certain line.
Sure. The only violence that's legitimate is the violence absolutely necessary for victory. Once the victory has been achieved, violence should end. Should stop. And if gratuitous violence is always immoral and wrong, forms of violence, massacring civilians just for the sake of massacring, obviously is wrong. The whole idea is what is coming up with a strategy to defeat your enemy, and that should be the focus. The focus should be how to win this war as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. Thoroughly, I mean, with as few casualties on your own side. But that does not involve gratuitous violence. And as I said before, I actually think it involves less casualties on the other side than kind of a prolonged war that keeps them going, and they keep popping up of tunnels, and they're going into hospitals, and then you have to go in again, and civilians get caught in the crossfire again. And it's just this endless battles that never, that keep inflicting pain on civilian population. That to me is much more damaging than get it over with, do it and win and come home in a sense.
Interesting. Any questions there, Michael, that are hitting you?
I'm just trying to process that. Well, I mean, I guess my question that pops in my mind is, it's easy to say that from where we're sitting. When you see pictures come out of Gaza and and you just feel intuitively like this is awful. How do you sort of square that in that moment between what you know and what you're feeling?
As someone who regards human life as the high standard
It's
of.
absolutely awful. It's horrible. It's particularly children. It's very, very depressing. And the blame is 100%, not 99.9, 100% on Hamas. So imagine if Hamas went into some way and just slaughtered a bunch of people, as they did on October 7th. I mean, it's horrible, and it's Hamas's fault. Every single kid that dies in Gaza, it doesn't matter whose bullet it is Hamas's fault. So I find it horrible. I find it depressing. It's sad, just like any massacre committed, any killing committed by the bad guys. But it's the bad guys. And the only way to stop it, and if you understand the only way to stop it, not just tomorrow, but the only way to stop it for the next 20 years is to thoroughly destroy Hamas. If you don't, that's fine. Then you'll just have to fight this again in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. I mean, look, the nice thing about this is I have a record here, right? When Oslo was signed, I said, with Yasser Arafat, I said, this is going to lead to more bloodshed, not to more peace. It did. Every time Israel negotiated with the PLO, a terrorist organization, more violence occurred. Every time they got tough with the PLO, violence declined. And when they ultimately compromised almost everything and gave the PLO almost everything they wanted, in return, they got a second intifada, which I don't know if you guys are too young to remember this, but this is a period of years where buses would explode and
We were
cafes
15,
would explode.
16.
Yeah, we were. I
Yeah, I
remember
mean, this
it well.
is 2000.
I couldn't go to Israel for the
2004,
summer,
5.
and it was a bummer. I remember.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, we were teenagers, but yes, of course.
It was horrific.
Sabaros and pizza shops and.
But that's what happens when you negotiate with evil people. It always does. So and then of course, Hamas takes over Gaza in 2007, and since then, how many kind of war skirmishes have there been?
Yeah.
Almost every year, there's something going on. We can continue that and have an October 7th every few years, or maybe build better walls, and there won't be an October 7th, but they'll still fire missiles over the border. The problem with Israel is that it has a high tolerance for its own casualties, and it has a high tolerance for being the victim. And but this war in Gaza right now should have been done in 2008.
So you
And it would have been easier in 2008.